Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of the most unwanted job descriptions in medieval Europe, the executioner. And that as saying something in a time when ratcatcher and full-time plague survivor were legitimate career paths, from swinging the sword of justice to being cursed, feared, and socially exiled. The life of a medieval executioner was a strange, brutal paradox. He was necessary, but never welcome. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you retuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. So you've just been born. Congratulations. You read the newest addition to a proud medieval family of executioners. That's right. While other babies are wrapped in linen and destined to become bakers, butchers, or if they lucky monks, you are gently placed in a cradle next to a whetstone and an axe. It is not a rattle you reshaking, it is a future. In the Middle Ages, execution wasn't the job you applied for. There was no town hall resume submission. It was inherited like a really cursed family heirloom. If your father was the executioner, you were the next in line. Simple, no room for career changes. No hopes of becoming a traveling bard or a slightly sad shoemaker. Your path was laid out, and it ended at the chopping block. From the moment you were old enough to walk, you were already getting sighted by villagers. Other kids run from you at the well. Adults lower their voices when you walk by, as if your tiny toddler hands are already soaked in symbolic blood. Spoiler, they are symbolically, of course, for now. You grow up in a house with a family dinner. Table conversations are less, how was your day, and more. How many strikes should it take to get it clean? There is no escaping it. Your toys might include miniature gallows, and your bedtime stories involve phrases like drawing and quartering, instead of happily ever after. And it's not just the job, it is the reputation. You could be the kindest, most literate, soft-spoken child in the kingdom, and people would still treat you like you sneak into homes at night, whispering threats to chickens. Your very surname might mark you. In some towns, entire family lines of executioners were labeled, tracked, and sometimes forbidden from entering churches, bakeries, or public baths. Hygiene and salvation not for you. But hey, there are perks. You'll probably never get bullied too hard. No one wants to mess with the executioner as kid. The fear is real. You might not be liked, but you will be respected in the same way people respect thunder or very sharp knives. So welcome to life. You didn't ask for this, but it is yours now forever. By 1849, over 90,000 people nicknamed 49ers were pouring into California by land, sea, and every miserable in-between route imaginable. And what started as one man squinting into a ditch became the largest mass migration in U.S. history. But here's the thing. Marshall never got rich. Neither did Sutter. The discoverers ended up broke, bitter, and pushed aside as the gold fever they unleashed consumed everything. So picture it. One accidental flicker in a muddy trench led to a global stampede that reshaped the map, fueled American expansion, and catapulted California from sleepy frontier to statehood in just 2 years. And the irony, the men who found the gold barely got a nugget. Now that we've set the stage, let's dive deeper into the madness, the migration, and the myths that turned California into the land of golden dreams and broken promises. Imagine you a farmer in Ohio or a shopkeeper in Boston in 1849. You hear the whispers, see the headlines. Gold, mountains of it just lying there for the taking in California. You sell your land, kiss your family goodbye, and start walking, literally, across the country. That's what thousands did. And just like that, the age of the 49ers had begun. They came in waves from every state and from places much farther. Latin Americans, Australians, Europeans, even a contingent of Chinese miners braving the treacherous Pacific crossing. Others boarded creaky ships, took a detour through Panama, and hoped they wouldn't catch yellow fever before boarding another ship north to San Francisco. And oh, San Francisco, a once sleepy port town with maybe 1,000 residents before the rush. By the end of 1849, over 25,000 people had flooded in. It was a surreal transformation. Canvas tents popped up faster than buildings. Whole ships were abandoned and turned into warehouses, prisons, and hotels. You could walk through the harbor without touching water, just stepping from one deserted ship deck to another. It wasn't glamorous. Picture mountains of mud, makeshift saloons, overpriced pickaxes, and a real estate market that made Manhattan look like a bargain bin. A single egg might cost you $3. A decent pair of boots? Good luck. Maybe $100. Inflation ran wild, and scams were more common than gold nuggets. But that didn't matter. The dream was enough. Gold fever had its grip. Some struck it rich in a single afternoon. Others dug for years and died penniless. The rivers of the Sierra Nevada became clogged with miners, each swinging a pan, hoping their next scoop would change everything. This migration changed more than just California. It altered the entire American psyche. Suddenly, hard work wasn't just noble. It might make you wealthy. Manifest destiny got a shot of adrenaline. California, barely a blip on the map a year before, was now the promised land. Of course, when thousands of desperate men pile into the same few valleys with shovels, things get tense. So you've made it. You've walked across deserts, survived dysentery, and maybe even dodged a few bandits. You've reached gold country. Congratulations. Now the real misery begins. Mining wasn't a glorious treasure hunt. It was backbreaking, soul-crushing labor. Forget chests full of gold coins. This was hours spent knee-deep in freezing rivers, swirling pans of gravel, praying to find a glimmer. Most didn't. For every lucky strike, there were 1,000 empty pans and 10,000 aching backs. In the early days, it was all about placer mining, scooping gravel from riverbeds and letting water do the work. But as the easy gold vanished, things escalated. Miners turned to rockers, sluices, and eventually hydraulic mining, a violent process that blasted entire hillsides apart with water cannons. It tore through the land and poisoned rivers, but it got results. The camps were chaos. Imagine a rowdy collection of tents, makeshift cabins, and saloons, all stitched together by desperation and mud. Bathing was optional. Food was scarce. Whiskey was not. Violence simmered under the surface. Arguments over claims turned deadly fast, especially when no one trusted the courts and everyone had a shovel. And then there was the disease. With thousands crammed into unsanitary camps, cholera and dysentery were just part of daily life. If you didn't die from contaminated water, you might die from a poorly cooked squirrel or an infection from a minor cut. There were no real doctors, just a few medicine men with more moonshine than medical knowledge. To top it all off, the prices were absurd. A shovel that cost $2 in New York could run you $30 in the mines. Eggs were luxury items. Laundry? Hope you enjoy wearing dirt. And if you struck it rich, good luck keeping it. But somehow the myth endured. People kept coming. The hope, the gamble, the raw possibility of it all was enough. Where gold went, people followed. And where people went, chaos wasn't far behind. The gold rush didn't just create mining camps. It birthed entire towns overnight. Places like Placerville, Marysville, and Deadwood. Yes, that Deadwood exploded in population faster than anyone could control. They were called boom towns, and the name fit. They boomed into existence and often collapsed just as fast. These were places without laws, without real government, and often without a moral compass. Judges were rare. sheriffs were rarer. And the gold, it made men desperate. If you didn't stake a good claim, someone might steal it. If you did stake a good claim, someone might still try to steal it or just shoot you and take it. Enter the vigilantes. In towns where the law hadn't arrived or had been paid off, citizens often took justice into their own hands. Vigilante groups formed, sometimes with noble intent, other times with pure greed. Trials could be quick, sentences quicker. If someone was caught stealing gold or cheating at cards, they might be hanged from the nearest tree without so much as a trial. It wasn't justice, it was convenience. The saloons were the nerve centers of these towns. Gambling, drinking, brawling, and the occasional accidental gunshot were all part of the soundtrack. And if you were looking for company, the soiled doves, women who'd followed the rush westward, ran the bordello, charging premiums for their companionship and surviving in a world heavily tilted against them. Still, not everyone was lawless. Many tried to build real communities. Churches sprang up, schools opened, and newspapers began circulating. San Francisco even formed a committee of vigilance to root out corruption, and ended up becoming more powerful than the actual government. One strange detail: gold wasn't always used for buying things. It was too easy to shave off. Instead, people traded in gold dust, literally measured by tiny brass scales on the bar counter. Pinch might get you a meal. A full pouch, a night you might not remember. But boom towns weren't built to last. Once the gold dried up, so did the population. Many towns were abandoned, becoming ghost towns almost overnight. While prospectors chased dreams of wealth, others paid a price that was far higher than gold. The California gold rush wasn't just a story of fortune. It was also one of displacement, violence, and racial injustice. And the first to suffer were the Native American tribes. California's indigenous peoples had lived in the region for thousands of years. But once the rush began, they were driven from their lands with brutal speed. Forests were cut down, rivers poisoned by mercury and sediment, and hunting grounds overtaken by miners and boomtowns. Some tribes were forced into servitude under the guise of apprenticeships. Others were outright massacred. State-sanctioned militia campaigns were even funded to remove native populations. It was nothing short of a disaster. In just 2 decades, California's native population plummeted by nearly 90%. And then came the waves of immigrants, especially the Chinese. By the early 1850s, tens of thousands of Chinese laborers had arrived in California. Most intended to work, earn money, and send it home to their families. But what they got instead was suspicion, racism, and harsh taxes. Former miners started farms, businesses, and newspapers. The infrastructure built for gold was repurposed for growth. Roads turned into trade routes, camps into cities, and shacks into homes. San Francisco went from a mud-soaked outpost to a thriving metropolis practically overnight. And the gold rush didn't just leave physical scars. It left an emotional blueprint. That same gamble-it-all attitude would later fuel the rise of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and the counterculture movements. Whether it was celluloid, silicon, or psychedelics, the idea was the same. Come west, try something wild, and maybe, just maybe, you'll strike gold. Even the tech boom of the late 20th and early 21st centuries echoes the spirit of 49, young entrepreneurs, fueled by belief and caffeine, rushing into California with nothing but a laptop and a dream. It's not so different from those dusty miners with pickaxes and high hopes. But the gold rush also reminds us of what ambition can cost. Native communities decimated, ecosystems disrupted, inequality baked into the economy from the very start. For every lucky strike, there were hundreds left behind, forgotten in the footnotes. Today, remnants of that era still dot the landscape: ghost towns, rusted mining equipment, and winding trails through the Sierra Nevada. Museums preserve the artifacts, schools teach the legends, and tourism boards sell the fantasy. But the deeper legacy lies in the psyche. A gold rush gave America a permanent sense of urgency, the idea that something bigger, better, richer is always out there. All you have to do is chase it. So when you hear the phrase, California Dream, remember it started with a shimmer in the dirt and 1,000 men willing to risk everything for a shot at something more. Long before anyone carved laws into stone or inked treaties onto papyrus, trade was already shaping the ancient world. It began not with maps or merchants, but with footsteps-worn tracks across hills and valleys, trodden by prehistoric peoples in search of what they lacked. Long before the Silk Road, the Amber Road, or the Spice Road, there were trails of salt, stone, and survival. Imagine a time before writing, before cities, when humans lived in scattered tribal groups bartering goods out of necessity. One village had flint, another had shells, a third had access to salt, a precious preservative, in a world without refrigeration. Somehow, those items moved traded hand to hand, tribe to tribe, across vast and difficult terrain. And the evidence is clear. Obsidian from Anatolia shows up in Neolithic dig sites hundreds of miles away. Baltic amber turns up in graves as far south as Mycenaean Greece. Someone, long before borders and bureaucracy, was moving these goods. These first trade routes were not carved or engineered. They were organic, dictated by nature. Rivers became highways. Mountain passes became corridors. Forest trails became lifelines. And with each passing generation, these paths grew more defined. Hunters became traders, and traders became messengers, carrying not only goods, but also gossip, stories, and even early religious ideas. Trade wasn't just about objects. It was about knowledge. It was how farming techniques, metallurgical skills, and even early artistic styles spread between cultures. A tribe that learned how to smelt copper from another might change its entire way of life. A decorative motif shared through traded pottery might inspire a whole new artistic tradition. These exchanges were slow, often spanning generations, but they were revolutionary. And all of this happened before writing existed. The legacy of these early roots lies in their persistence. Many later trade roads, like parts of the Silk Road or the Arabian incense trails, followed the same general paths first used by prehistoric traders. These invisible highways were the nervous system of early human connection, a web of trails that wove the world together long before anyone ever drew a map. By 3000 BCE, the scattered barter trails of prehistory had evolved into something more sophisticated, structured commerce between cities, kingdoms, and eventually empires. Nowhere was this transformation more dramatic than in Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. Often called the cradle of civilization, it was also the cradle of ancient commerce. The Sumerians, and later the Akkadians and Babylonians, weren't just farmers and builders. They were traders, and they knew the value of keeping records. Around this time, they developed cuneiform, one of the earliest known writing systems. At first, it was used to track goods, how much grain was traded, how many goats exchanged, what quantity of beer was delivered to the temple storehouse. In other words, writing was born out of the need to manage trade. These Mesopotamian cities didn't have everything they needed, so trade became essential. They imported timber from the Levant, copper from Oman, tin from Iran, and precious stones like lapis lazuli from what is now Afghanistan. In return, they exported textiles, grain, oil, and intricately crafted goods. The merchants who facilitated this trade weren't adventurers. They were professionals, often backed by temples or royal houses, with contracts, ledgers, and risk-sharing agreements. Mesopotamia's trade routes extended overland and along waterways. The Euphrates and Tigris served as the main arteries, with barges ferrying goods between cities like Ur, Uruk, and Babylon. Overland caravans of donkeys carried goods north to Anatolia or east toward Elam. Trade wasn't just economic, it was political. Alliances were forged through exchange. Kings sent gifts to secure peace, and merchants acted as informal diplomats, carrying messages between distant lands. The concept of a merchant class began to emerge. These weren't nobles, priests, or warriors. They were specialists in negotiation, risk, and logistics, and they wielded real influence. In time, their presence became essential to the stability of these early urban economies. Mesopotamia showed that trade could bind cities together, create wealth, and drive innovation. It transformed exchange from necessity to system, from handshakes to contracts. While Mesopotamian merchants ruled the rivers and overland routes of the Near East, another civilization rose to dominate the seas, the Phoenicians. By 1200 BCE, these master sailors from the Levantine coast, modern-day Lebanon, and parts of Syria and Israel had transformed the Mediterranean into one of history's most active maritime trade networks. The Phoenicians didn't build empires through conquest. They built them through commerce. Their city-states, notably Tyre, Sidon, and Byblus, were small but fiercely independent, and they shared a common gift, the sea. With narrow strips of land and limited agriculture, these cities turned to the waves for survival. And they did more than survive. They thrived. Phoenician ships were fast, durable, and ahead of their time. They pioneered the use of bireme ships with 2 rows of oars, making long-distance sea travel more efficient and reliable. These vessels crisscrossed the Mediterranean, trading everything from timber and glass to the famed Tyrian purple dye, extracted from sea snails and worth its weight in gold. But perhaps their most lasting legacy was what they carried along with their cargo, the alphabet. The Phoenician writing system, with its 22 consonantal letters, would go on to inspire Greek, Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew scripts, the backbone of modern written communication. They established trading posts from Cyprus to Carthage, from Sicily to southern Spain. Carthage itself, which later became Rome's fiercest rival, started as a humble Phoenician outpost. These coastal colonies created a commercial network that rivaled any terrestrial empire. And Phoenician trade wasn't just about moving goods, it was about cultural diffusion. Through their interactions, they spread technologies, religious practices, and art styles across 3 continents. Egyptian scarabs ended up in Iberian graves. Babylonian cylinder seals were found in Greek islands. A web of connection grew, tied not by blood or blade, but by trade. Yet for all their influence, the Phoenicians left behind few monumental ruins. Their legacy is quieter, found in shipwrecks, scattered pottery, and the alphabets we still use today. As seafarers like the Phoenicians turned the Mediterranean into a commercial superhighway, another equally vital network was thriving far from the coast across the vast deserts of North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. In 1850, California passed a foreign miners' tax, targeting the Chinese specifically. They were banned from owning land, from testifying against white men in court, and from mining without paying extortion-level fees. Yet despite these barriers, many Chinese miners endured. They formed tight-knit communities, reworked abandoned claims, and even built the backbone of future infrastructure, laying tracks for the transcontinental railroad. Just a few years later, Mexican and Latin American miners were also pushed out, often violently. Despite having legitimate claims and gold mining experience, they were rounded out of towns, labeled greasers, and stripped of their rights. And African Americans, both free and enslaved individuals, came west seeking opportunity. Some did find it, establishing businesses, farms, and even newspapers. But the racial lines were always shifting, and the promise of freedom came with no guarantees. Slavery wasn't legal in California, but loopholes were exploited by Southern slaveholders who brought enslaved people with them under other names. The gold rush transformed America, but it also revealed its deepest contradictions. It was a land of opportunity, yes, but only for some. gold didn't just glitter. It greased the gears of a transforming nation. The California gold rush injected a seismic jolt into the U.S. economy. By 1852, gold exports from California totaled over $80 million. That as billions in today as dollars. That kind of influx doesn't just fill pockets. It fills banks, backs currencies, and fuels industries. Suddenly, California wasn't a sleepy western frontier. It was the epicenter of national attention, wealth, and ambition. But there was one big problem. California wasn't a state. It wasn't even organized territory in the traditional sense. It had been acquired in 1848 after the Mexican-American War, but governance was a mess. The sudden flood of settlers made it clear something had to be done, and fast. So, in 1850, just 2 years after the first gold nugget was found, California became the 31st state. That's warp speed for U.S. expansion. And unlike many other Western territories, it bypassed the awkward adolescent years as a territory. Straight to statehood, no waiting in line. But there was a catch. California was admitted as a free state, banning slavery. This sent the already fragile balance between free and slave states into a tailspin. The South was furious. The North was energized. And the political tension pushed the nation one step closer to civil war. Meanwhile, back in California, the wealth kept flowing. And not just from gold. Entrepreneurs realized that the miners were the real gold mine. A German immigrant named Levi Strauss began selling tough canvas pants that miners couldn't tear through and invented blue jeans. Leland Stanford sold supplies to miners before going on to help build the Transcontinental Railroad and found Stanford University. That railroad, by the way, became the artery connecting California's gold to Eastern markets. Before the railroads, it took months to reach California by land or sea. With trains, a matter of days. The gold rush didn't just spark economic growth. It sparked infrastructure, commerce, and a boom in Western migration. And while California grew richer and more connected, the U.S. realized something else. Whoever controlled the West might just control the future. If the gold rush turned men into legends, it also turned landscapes into battlegrounds. The earliest mining efforts were relatively low impact. Hands, shovels, maybe a rocker box along a riverbank. But as the surface gold ran out, miners turned to more aggressive methods. That's when things got ugly. By the mid-1850s, hydraulic mining arrived. Picture this. Massive nozzles called monitors shot water with enough pressure to blast entire hillsides apart. Entire mountains were turned to mud slurry in the hunt for tiny flakes of gold. It was fast, efficient, and utterly devastating. Trees were flattened. Hills disappeared. Rivers ran brown for miles. Sediment from hydraulic mining clogged riverbeds and flooded farmlands. The once fertile Central Valley began drowning under tons of mining debris. The Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers overflowed not just from rainfall, but from the unnatural buildup of displaced earth. Crops died, towns flooded, fish populations collapsed. It wasn't mining. It was slow-motion environmental warfare. Miners also used mercury to help separate gold from sediment. It worked, but the mercury didn't disappear. It seeped into soil, flowed downstream, and poisoned ecosystems. To this day, mercury from the gold rush era is still found in California's waterways nearly 2 centuries later. Eventually, the destruction became impossible to ignore. In the 1880s, a group of Central Valley farmers sued a hydraulic mining company in a case that became a national landmark. Woodruff v. North Bloomfield Gravel Mining Company. The farmers won, and in 1884 hydraulic mining was effectively banned, the first major environmental ruling in U.S. history. But the damage had been done. The California landscape had been reshaped, sometimes beyond recognition. Forests turned to barren mud flats. Hills hollowed out and never recovered. Rivers were rerouted, ecosystems upended, and yet the gold rush also sparked the beginning of America's environmental conscience. As people saw the toll, voices began to rise calling for balance, for responsibility, for protection of the land. These were the seeds that decades later would grow into national parks and conservation movements. The gold rush built dreams, yes, but it also left scars. By the late 1850s, the richest gold veins had been tapped. Boom towns began to empty, and the pickaxes were traded in for plows, pens, and printing presses. But the gold rush wasn't fading. It was transforming. What started as a chaotic scramble became a cultural myth. The California Gold Rush etched itself into the American imagination as a story of adventure, freedom, and reinvention. Newspapers spun tales of lucky strikes and overnight millionaires, while dime novels turned grubby prospectors into rugged heroes of the West. Of course, reality was messier, but myths rarely need facts. The prospector became an American icon, weathered hat, long beard, gold pan in hand. Never mind that most real miners were broken, broke, or buried in shallow graves. The image stuck. California became synonymous with opportunity. The American dream suddenly had a location. Even phrases we still use today were born in this gold-soaked era. Striking it rich, panning for gold, and yes, even the mother lode. They all echo the lingo of 1850s mining camps. And let's not forget the iconic Levi's jeans, born from the rugged needs of miners and eventually adopted by the world. Cities like San Francisco leaned into the legend. What had once been a lawless port now rebranded itself as a gateway to success. Tourism pamphlets spoke of gold country, and old mining towns began staging festivals, reenactments, and parades celebrating a time that had nearly broken them. The gold rush also deeply influenced American cinema. Westerns romanticized the lone miner with a heart of gold, fending off claim jumpers and wooing saloon girls. It wasn't accurate, but it sold tickets and helped cement the frontier myth in popular culture. But beneath the glamorized legends lay harder truths of environmental damage, racial exclusion, and lives lost in pursuit of fleeting glitter. Still, the dream endured. And perhaps that was the point, because the gold rush wasn't just about wealth. It was about hope. The belief that if you were brave or lucky or stubborn enough, you could change your life with a shovel and some grit. The California Gold Rush officially ended in 1855, but its impact never really stopped. California, once a remote Mexican frontier, had become a powerhouse. Within just a few years, it had gained statehood, reshaped America's economy, and attracted people from every continent. But more than that, it had become a symbol of reinvention, of ambition, of what might still be buried just beneath the surface. The population surge didn't just bring gold hunters. It brought builders, teachers, merchants, and dreamers. These were the trade routes of camel caravans, ancient highways etched into the sand, where survival was earned mile by mile. The desert may seem like a barrier, but for ancient traders, it was a corridor. Long before paved roads, camel caravans connected sub-Saharan Africa with North Africa, the Levant, and Arabia. These routes moved gold, salt, frankincense, myrrh, ivory, slaves, and stories. The camel, known as the ship of the desert, made it all possible. Domesticated around 1000 BCE, the dromedary camel could endure scorching heat, travel for days without water, and carry loads of up to 600 pounds. In North Africa, the trans-Saharan trade routes flourished between kingdoms like Ghana, Mali, and later Songhai. These were not barren wastelands. They were networks of oases, market towns, and fortified caravanserais where traders rested, watered their camels, and exchanged goods under starlit skies. Gold from the Niger River basin traveled north, often traded weight for weight with salt, a vital resource in the tropics. Salt from the Sahara was cut into massive blocks and transported south, forming the backbone of empires. Meanwhile, in Arabia, the incense trade was booming. Frankincense and myrrh, harvested in southern Arabia, modern Yemen, and Oman, were highly prized in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome for their use in temples, medicine, and burials. Caravans traversed the Arabian desert along routes like the Incense Road, stopping at cities such as Petra and Mecca long before Islam's rise. These weren't quick trips. Some caravans took months, even years. Traders faced sandstorms, bandits, and extreme dehydration, but the rewards were enormous. Cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Uber grew rich and influential, serving as hubs of wealth, culture, and learning. What the desert trade lacked in monuments, it made up for in resilience. These routes connected continents, empires, and faiths. They stitched together Africa, Arabia, and beyond one hoofprint at a time. No ancient trade network captured the imagination or reshaped the world quite like the Silk Road. Spanning over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean, it wasn't a single road, but a tangled web of caravan trails, mountain passes, and river crossings that wove together the destinies of entire civilizations. It began in earnest during the Han Dynasty around the 2nd century BCE, when the Chinese Emperor Wu sent envoy Zhang Qian westward in search of allies. What he found instead was opportunity, the discovery that distant peoples were eager for China's most luxurious export, silk. Lightweight, durable, and practically glowing, silk became a sensation across Central Asia, Persia, and eventually Rome, where senators paid fortunes to wear it and then nervously declared it decadent and dangerous. But silk was just the beginning. East met West in the form of goods, ideas, and even diseases. From China came porcelain, tea, and paper. From India, spices, gemstones, and Buddhism. Persia offered carpets, glassware, and horses. Rome and later Byzantium exported wine, olive oil, and fine metalwork. Every link in the chain brought something new and received something unexpected. The road itself was brutal. Traders crossed scorching deserts like the Taklamakan and climbed icy peaks in the Pamirs. Bandits lurked at every pass, and merchants rarely made the full journey. Instead, goods changed hands dozens of times, passed along like whispers through markets and caravanserais. Cultural exchange flourished alongside commerce. Monks, missionaries, and musicians traveled these paths, spreading philosophies and fables. The Silk Road didn't just carry merchandise. It transported mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and art. The spread of Buddhism from India into China and beyond is one of the Silk Road's most profound legacies. Cities like Samarkand, Kashgar, and Dunhuang became cosmopolitan centers where languages mixed and temples stood side by side. Entire empires rose and fell around, controlling key stretches of the route, from the Parthians to the Sogdians to the Mongols. And then came the Black Death, likely carried along these same routes in the 14th century, reminding the world that trade also moves what we can't see. While the Silk Road carried caravans across mountains and deserts, the Indian Ocean offered a liquid superhighway 1 that was faster, cheaper, and in many ways, even more influential. By 1000 BCE, the Indian Ocean trade network was already humming with activity, connecting East Africa, Arabia, India, Southeast Asia, and eventually China in a vast web of commerce and culture. Unlike the chaotic unpredictability of land routes, the Indian Ocean had a rhythm, the monsoons. These seasonal winds were predictable. One direction in summer, the opposite in winter. Skilled sailors learned to ride these wind cycles, allowing for planned round trips across vast distances. Thanks to the monsoon system, a merchant ship could sail from East Africa to India, load up with goods, and return months later with time to spare. What did they carry? Everything. From India, black pepper, cotton textiles, ivory carvings, and later, sugar and indigo. From Arabia, frankincense, myrrh, horses, and dates. East Africa offered gold, slaves, and exotic animal products. Southeast Asia traded in spices, nutmeg, cloves, and cinnamon that were so valuable they could be worth more than gold per ounce. This wasn't just about raw materials, it was about ideas. Islam spread rapidly along these maritime routes, not by conquest, but by commerce. Muslim merchants established communities in Indian ports, on the Swahili coast, and as far east as Indonesia. Local rulers often converted for economic advantage, embedding religion into trade. Ports like Calicut, Zanzibar, and Malacca became multi-ethnic melting pots. You could hear Arabic, Tamil, Swahili, and Chinese spoken in a single market. These weren't backwaters, they were global hubs. Centuries before globalization became a buzzword. Ship technology also advanced rapidly. The dhow, with its triangular sail, became the vessel of choice, agile and fast. Chinese junks' massive ships with multiple decks and watertight compartments later joined the mix, especially under the voyages of Admiral Zheng He in the 15th century. What made the Indian Ocean trade special wasn't just its scale, but its collaboration. Unlike the territorial empires on land, the sea trade relied more on mutual benefit than brute force, at least until later European intervention. As trade routes matured, powerful empires began to realize something crucial. Controlling the road meant controlling the wealth. From the Persian royal road to Rome, the stone highways to the mountainous trails of the Inca Empire, these overland routes became tools not just of commerce, but of dominance, diplomacy, and statecraft. Pilgrims weren't just carrying faith, they carried money, supplies, stories, and even new ideas. Inns, markets, and towns grew along these sacred paths, and local economies boomed. Spiritual devotion kept people moving, and commerce followed in their footsteps. Meanwhile, Islamic empires to the east were thriving. The Abbasid Caliphate transformed cities like Baghdad and Damascus into glittering trade centers. Muslim merchants expanded trade into sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, and even China, linking the Islamic world to the revived Silk Road. Arabic became the lingua franca of trade across 3 continents. In Northern Europe, the Hanseatic League emerged, a powerful alliance of merchant cities like Lübeck, Hamburg, and Bruges. They controlled the flow of goods across the Baltic and North Seas, trading salt, furs, grain, and timber. With their own navies and legal systems, they weren't just traders, they were an economic superpower. Meanwhile, Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa took trade to new heights. Perfectly positioned between East and West, they became middlemen for luxury goods arriving from Asia via the Eastern Mediterranean. Spices, silks, and precious stones flowed through their ports, enriching powerful merchant families like the Medici. Then came the Crusades. While they failed to reclaim the Holy Land, they succeeded in reopening and expanding East-West connections. European crusaders returned not just with scars, but with silks, spices, and new appetites. The result was a booming demand for Eastern goods and a renewed interest in the overland and maritime trade routes that could deliver them. Guilds emerged to protect local economies and standardize trade. Markets became fairs, fairs became towns, and towns became cities. Trade wasn't just reviving, it was institutionalizing. By the late 15th century, the world was on the verge of a dramatic transformation. The age of ancient trade routes was giving way to a new era, one driven by sails, cannons, and global ambition. But the foundation for this seismic shift had been laid over millennia on the backs of camels, ox carts, and merchant ships guided by the stars. The explosion of maritime exploration led by Portugal and Spain was not the beginning of global trade, but its acceleration. Vasco da Gama's sea route to India in 1498 bypassed the land-based Silk Road entirely, undercutting Middle Eastern middlemen and redrawing the economic map. Suddenly, spices, silks, and porcelain flowed straight from Asia to Europe faster, cheaper, and on a scale never before seen. Colonial empires soon followed. The Portuguese set up trading posts from Mozambique to Malacca. The Spanish sailed west and discovered the Americas, where gold and silver were extracted in vast quantities and shipped across oceans. The Dutch and English weren't far behind, founding East India companies that acted like governments, with armies, navies, and monopolies on entire trade networks. Ancient land routes like the Silk Road faded in importance, but their legacy endured in infrastructure, language, culture, and commerce. Trade hubs like Samarkand and Constantinople, though diminished, retained echoes of their former glory. New cities rose from their legacy. Amsterdam, London, and New York built on the same principles of connectivity and commerce. Modern trade routes, railroads, highways, air corridors, and undersea cables still trace the patterns established by ancient traders. Globalization may be powered by algorithms in cargo ships today, but its DNA comes from Phoenician sea lanes, Roman roads, and Indian Ocean monsoons. And the influence isn't just economic. Ideas, religions, technologies, even diseases, all followed the trails of traders. The compass, the printing press, algebra, coffee, Buddhism, none of these spread without commerce. Trade didn't just move goods, it moved history. So next time you see a container ship glide across the ocean or a freight train rattle past, remember, it's not just steel and cargo. It's the echo of a Silk Road caravan, the shadow of a Phoenician galley, the pulse of humanity, forever in motion, chasing not just profit, but connection. Tulum is not your typical ancient Maya city. While most Maya centers are buried deep in the jungle, surrounded by dense forest and hidden temples, Tulum rises dramatically above the Korean Sea, perched on a limestone cliff overlooking turquoise waves. It has a postcard scene with a powerful history, a sacred coastal outpost that stood watch over both the land and the sea. Located on the eastern edge of the Yucatan Peninsula, in what is now Quintana Roo, Mexico, Tulum was one of the last major cities built and inhabited by the Maya. Its peak came relatively late, between the 13th and 15th centuries CE, during the post-classic period, just before the Spanish arrival. But despite its late bloom, Tulum left an outsized mark on Maya history. Its name means wall in Yucatec Maya, a reference to the thick limestone barrier that encloses the city on three sides. The fourth side? That's the open Caribbean Sea, stretching endlessly eastward. This combination made Tulum uniquely defensible and symbolically significant. According to some accounts, the city may have originally been called Zama, meaning City of the Dawn, likely in reference to its perfect alignment with the rising sun. From its cliffs, Maya lookouts could spot merchant canoes gliding in from Cuba, Belize, and even Honduras. Tulum was a key node in a complex maritime trade network, dealing in obsidian, jade, salt, honey, textiles, and dried fish. It connected inland cities like Koba and Chichen Itza to the sea, and its wealth flowed through both canoes and caravans. But Tulum wasn't just a trade hub, it was a spiritual stronghold. Every building, every platform, and every shrine was carefully positioned, many aligned with celestial bodies or sacred dates in the Maya calendar. It was a city that watched the sky as much as the surf. And even after the Spanish arrived and the city was eventually abandoned, Tulum was never truly forgotten. Its ruins remained visible from the sea, a haunting reminder to passing sailors of a civilization that charted the stars long before Europeans arrived. Tulum may appear small compared to Maya giants like Chichen Itza or Tikal, but its compactness is deceptive. Every structure within its stone walls was placed with purpose, guided by astronomy, spiritual belief, and strategic design. This wasn't just a city, it was a cosmic map carved into stone. At its core, Tulum's layout reflects a balance between the earthly and the celestial. The The city is surrounded on 3 sides by thick defensive walls, each up to 5 meters thick and 3 meters high, a clear statement that Tulum was as concerned with protection as it was with worship. But within those walls lies a careful arrangement of temples, altars, and platforms that aligned with the heavens. The centerpiece of the city is El Castillo, not a castle in the European sense, but a temple pyramid that dominates the skyline. Built on a cliff edge, it served both as a religious shrine and a lighthouse for Maya sailors. When the sun rises directly behind it during key times of the year, it lights the facade in perfect symmetry. Some scholars believe it was used to track the solstices and equinoxes, allowing the Maya to align their rituals with the rhythms of the cosmos. Next to El Castillo is the Temple of the Descending God, named for the carved figure above its doorway, a figure with wings and an inverted posture, believed to represent a celestial or fertility deity. This temple faces west, catching the sunset and perhaps symbolizing the transition from day to night, life to death, key themes in Maya spirituality. Many buildings are constructed on raised platforms and are oriented along precise axes, often northeast-southwest or east-west. These were not arbitrary choices. They echo the Maya obsession with tracking Venus, the sun, and the lunar cycle. Even doorways and windows seem to frame celestial events at certain times of the year. Tulum's planners didn't just design a defensible city. They designed a spiritual calendar in stone. It was a place where architecture, astronomy, and mythology merged into daily life. Rising above the turquoise sea like a silent sentinel, El Castillo is Tulum's most iconic structure. Positioned at the edge of a limestone cliff, it commands not just the coastline, but the heavens, a fusion of engineering, celestial alignment, and sacred symbolism. Though not as massive as the Great Pyramids of inland Maya cities, El Castillo was never meant to compete in size. It was meant to signal. Built in stages, El Castillo likely served many roles: temple, shrine, watchtower, and possibly even lighthouse. By day, its high elevation and stark stone facade made it visible far out at sea. For Maya sailors navigating the Caribbean in large dugout canoes, El Castillo was both a physical and spiritual harbor, a beacon of protection under the watch of the gods. And by night, the structure may have transformed again. Fires lit within the temple at its summit, combined with cleverly placed windows. And natural gaps in the coral reef could have created a flickering glow, a signal guiding seafarers safely through narrow breaks in the coral. In this, El Castillo may have been one of the earliest lighthouse-like structures in the Americas. Religiously, it is thought to have been dedicated to the diving god, or descending god, a celestial figure closely associated with Venus. The Maya believed Venus governed warfare, agriculture, and the sacred calendar. Structures like El Castillo were tools to track its journey through the sky. On specific dates, the sun would rise or set directly in line with the temple, illuminating its facade in a brief but powerful moment of cosmic synchronization. The temple itself is modest in size, but elevated for maximum impact. Its stairways and niches suggest that priests held rituals at its summit, visible from the plaza and the coastline below. Unlike the sprawling temple complexes of inland cities, El Castillo wasn't about grandeur, it was about purpose. It guided ships, channeled solar energy, and connected the sea with the sky. Nestled at the ceremonial core of Tulum is the Temple of the Frescoes, one of the most spiritually rich and visually captivating structures in the city. Where El Castillo impresses through scale and placement, the Temple of the Frescoes invites awe through intricate detail. It is a multi-level temple complex, adorned with iconography and containing some of the finest surviving murals on the Yucatan coast. The temple served dual roles, as a shrine and as an observatory. The upper levels likely hosted ritual ceremonies by priests, while the lower chambers held murals and stone carvings that breathed life into the Maya cosmos. Despite centuries of weathering, the artwork retains enough clarity to reveal the Maya's deeply layered spiritual worldview. The frescoes inside depict a pantheon of gods, mythical beings, and supernatural forces. The most prominent is the descending god, often shown upside down, a rare and compelling figure in Maya iconography. Associated with Venus, fertility, and possibly bees, this enigmatic deity appears repeatedly throughout Tulum, reinforcing his significance to the city's identity. The murals also portray stories of creation, journeys through the underworld, and celestial battles, swirling bands of sky, earth monsters, and heavenly symbols forming a vivid narrative of a multi-dimensional universe. For the Maya, the cosmos was layered into three realms: the heavens above, the earthly plane, and the watery underworld, all of which are visually present in these murals. Outside, the temple is just as symbolic. Stucco masks and niches, some likely used for offerings, adorn the exterior. The portico, supported by columns, gives the building an almost Greco-Maya look, a rarity in the region. Astronomically, the Temple of the Frescoes may have been aligned with solar events. Sightlines and openings might have marked the solstices and equinoxes, helping the priesthood keep the sacred calendar in harmony with the cosmos. It was not only a house of worship, but also a timekeeping instrument, functional and beautiful in equal measure. Nearby, another structure offers a window into Tulum's mystical heart, the Temple of the Descending God. Modest in size, but brimming with spiritual depth, this temple honors one of the most mysterious figures in Maya mythology. The descending god, depicted inverted, with flared wings or headdress, appears to descend from the heavens. His image is carved and painted throughout Tulum, as though watching over the city from every angle. Located just west of El Castillo, the temple stands on a raised platform with a single sanctuary room. Above the doorway sits a prominent niche, housing a stucco image of the god himself, head first, knees bent, arms outstretched in mid-descent. Though his true name is unknown, some scholars associate him with Kinich Ahau, the sun god, or with a deity linked to bees and honey, vital to Maya agriculture and ceremony. This inverted posture is highly unusual. Most Maya deities are shown upright, enthroned, or battling foes. But here, the descending pose suggests a divine messenger crossing realms, bringing wisdom or power from the sky down to the human world. Others link him again to Venus, a morning star whose appearances marked times of war and rebirth. The temple's orientation captures the light of the setting sun during key times of year, creating radiant moments of illumination that likely signaled sacred rituals or seasonal shifts. Inside, the temple may have held incense burners, offerings, or even remains of elite individuals. Though small, it was a sacred chamber where omens were interpreted, prayers whispered, and the sky itself seemed to bow toward the earth. The image of the descending god, wings spread and body suspended mid-fall, became an emblem of Tulum, of a city poised between worlds, between calendar cycles and cosmic forces. While Tulum is renowned for its temples and celestial alignments, its walls tell a tale of strategy and resilience. Unlike most Maya cities that sprawled freely, Tulum was built like a fortress. 3 massive walls enclosed the city on its inland sides, while the fourth side opened onto a sheer cliff above the Caribbean. These walls were not symbolic. They were real defenses, up to 5 meters thick and tall, with narrow, easily defended entry points. Intruders would be forced to pass in single file, exposed and vulnerable. Strategically positioned watchtowers dotted the perimeter, with small windows offering wide views over land and sea. From here, lookouts could spot approaching canoes long before they reached shore. These towers may have served for communication, as well using smoke or fire to signal danger. Yet even this martial architecture held spiritual weight. The walls didn't merely keep enemies out. They marked the boundary between sacred space and the chaotic world beyond. Inside the walls, rituals aligned with the heavens. Outside lay the unpredictable wilderness of war, politics, and change. Tulum's location also gave it unparalleled control over coastal trade. The city sat along the Maya Maritime Highway, an aquatic trade route stretching from modern Honduras to the Gulf of Mexico. Goods like salt, jade, cacao, honey, and obsidian passed through Tulum's gates. Any sailor hugging the coast would see its silhouette from afar, a sign not just of trade, but of power. The city's prosperity wasn't built on what it produced, but on what it processed. It was a hub, a checkpoint for goods, a place of taxation, redistribution, and blessing. The Maya were skilled sailors, paddling long distances in massive canoes carved from saber trees. These boats, capable of carrying dozens of people and heavy cargo, followed ocean currents and trade winds along established sea routes. Tulum became a critical stop. From the mountains came obsidian and jade. From the lowlands came feathers, cotton, salt, dried fish, and honey. Ceramics and imported items hint at contact with far-off peoples from central Mexico to the Gulf Coast. Tulum was never isolated. It was a nexus of spiritual, economic, and cultural exchange. Canoes would land on the beaches below the cliffs. Goods were offloaded, carried uphill, and then distributed or sent inland to cities like Koba. Tulum's walls didn't just protect. They regulated. Entry and exit were controlled. Priests may have blessed goods as they changed hands, intertwining ritual with commerce in a sacred cycle. In this way, Tulum stood not only as a physical gateway, but as a spiritual one channeling the flow of wealth, energy, and meaning through its heart. But no city lasts forever. Tulum flourished for centuries, but by the time the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, its influence had begun to wane. Its temples still stood, its walls remained, but the bustling energy had faded. There are no signs of destruction, no fire, no invasion, just a gradual retreat. Trade networks shifted. Larger cities inland rose and fell. Political alliances fractured. Drought and soil exhaustion stressed the land. Even though Tulum was coastal, it was not immune to the ripple effects of Maya decline. Spanish explorers sailed past and marveled at what they saw: tall stone temples, city walls perched above the waves, but they did not invade immediately. By the end of the 1500s, Tulum was abandoned. Disease, colonization, and shifting cultural tides slowly emptied its plazas. And yet, Tulum never truly disappeared. Unlike jungle cities lost to overgrowth, it remained visible from the water. Sailors passed it for generations, its silhouette, a memory etched into the coastline. Long after its last incense burned and its final traders departed, Tulum stood silent above the sea, not lost but waiting. Unlike jungle cities like Palenque or Calakmul, Tulum was never completely buried. Its cliffside perch kept it visible to sailors and locals alike. But it wasn't until the 19th century that it re-entered the world's historical imagination. In 1842, two explorers, John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood, arrived in Tulum during their now famous expedition through the Maya world. Stephens, an American diplomat, and Catherwood, a British artist, were among the first Europeans to document the ruins in detail. Catherwood's illustrations of El Castillo and the Temple of the Descending God mesmerized European readers, and Tulum quickly gained fame as one of the most photogenic and accessible Maya sites. Archaeological work increased in the 20th century. The Mexican government began preservation efforts, stabilizing structures and clearing vegetation. Unlike deeper jungle ruins, Tulum was relatively easy to access and soon became a popular destination, not just for historians but for tourists, photographers, and spiritual seekers. Today, Tulum is one of the most visited archaeological sites in Mexico. Thousands walk through its stone gates each day, past temples that once aligned with the stars and walls that once defended sacred ground. Visitors stand where Maya priests once charted Venus in the sky and where sailors once saw the city emerge like a vision from the waves. Yet the real magic of Tulum lies in what it continues to reveal. New studies are using LiDAR scanning and satellite mapping to uncover more about the site's original layout and its connections to inland cities like Koba. Scholars are still debating the true identity of the descending god, the precise function of El Castillo, and the exact reasons for the city's fall. But beyond the questions, Tulum remains a symbol of Maya resilience, architectural genius, and cosmic curiosity. It reminds us that ancient people weren't isolated in the past. They navigated oceans, tracked stars, built observatories, and structured cities around cycles larger than themselves. Tulum isn't just ruins on a cliff. It's a living testament to a civilization that saw the universe as something to align with, not conquer. And that vision still echoes every time the rising sun spills across the stone.